Mark's been working his tail off, along with another guy that's a great attorney here in Northern California, Robert Rigetti, and he has been modest about the amount of work he's been putting in, and it's remarkable. You might say, why do we want to write our Constitution now? And I'll tell you why. Because what he failed to say, and he's modest about it, is that if you go to Congress and you don't have a Constitution, they'll write one for you. And they won't let you interfere with their writing. So we're way better off saying, no, this is our Constitution. You accept us with this Constitution. And if they say make some minor changes, maybe, but at least we have control of our own destiny. Well, I just was sitting talking to Chris, and he reminded me of something that I had totally forgotten that he mentioned months ago, and I fell out of my head, about Orange County. He said there was actually acquiescence bordering on concessions by the Republicans that were running the state, the county of Orange, and they actually wanted the Chinese money because they wanted the Chinese money. So they are as complicit in the failure of Orange County as were all the non-Republicans, which at the time were not so many, in Orange County. And he stepped in and straightened it out. So we got Chris here to talk about, most importantly, I think, what are we expecting in New California? When are they going to be bankrupt enough for us to step in? And there's nobody better at this in the world than Chris Street. Chris, come on.
Okay, I think I'm a little taller here.
You are.
Okay, so I don't have a clicker. I'm going to point and have Mark change my slides. But first of all, my role in New California is financial. And so I try to stay out of the political side of it and the rest, although I have opinions and I give you structure and answers, but I try to stay out of that part because I have 5 people in my group and we've been killing ourselves, quite frankly, to get position where we would understand the needs of forming a state, what the requirements would be, how the systems would work, sort of as if, you know, what I do in my day job, which is a consulting job, mostly to turn around and restructure, you know, severely financially distressed companies or bankrupt companies at large scale. So I've done big companies with tens of thousands of employees, so I understand what scale is all about. More important, I understand how systems work and what it takes to, you know, be a startup at scale. Now, there are a lot of people say I can do a startup. You can be at Starbucks and be a startup, I guess. You know, if somebody gives you some money. Most people start companies with the bank of your dad. And, you know, bank of family is a good thing to start with, you know, because you kind of know these people. They can be a little difficult, but, you know, the people you know sometimes are better than the people you don't. When you deal with large organizations at scale, you need to understand how that thing works. You need to have been there enough to where you understand how to manage people, and more importantly than manage people is manage the managers. Because my personal belief is most people, you know, they have a job because they need money and they work, but and they want to work. They need that job. But managers get to be a little tricky. A lot of them started out with that sort of starting. Then they got some status and position, and they're more involved in their own status than they are in getting the job done. So when you deal with large organizations, you have to have very clear systems. You have to have a set of rules. You know, you get one foul ball, then you foul out. And you have to have structure so that they're not going to be encouraged to foul it. Because it would be better if I had a consistent team. If you give me a team of B- players, the whole company, the whole organization, B- players, and I can stay at that level all the time, everybody, I will crush the competition. You know, it's the variability that kills you. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the variability that kills you. Because most people don't understand history. Because they're taught a history that doesn't really tie to financial numbers. And when it comes to history, trust me, it's about money. And the first money that counts is, any of you have ever heard of Braddock's defeat? Braddock's defeat. In 1754, the British, the most powerful organization in the world, decided they were going to go spank the French and take over Mississippi and the Ohio Valley, and they brought 2 of their top regiments. You know, these are the most beautiful, powerful war people in the world. You know, they went across the continents of Europe, and they had their own cannons, these, you know, very fine artillery, and, you know, very accomplished people. And they decided to go over the Appalachian Mountains and go down and kick the butts of the French and their allies, the Indians. One mistake. Europe is like a flat land, and, you know, the Appalachians go up and down, right? So the most powerful army, brought in by the most powerful navy in the world, goes up this hill, and they bring along these, you know, colonists. And they have this guy, George Washington, who's sort of in charge of the colonists. And the colonists, you know, they actually, like, lived there. And they were distracted by reality. And, you know, they warned them that you really don't do that here. Maybe you do that there, you don't do that here. And the British, of course, said, you don't know anything because we're the British. We do it anywhere we want to do. And so they actually, the Americans stayed off to the side in the wings, and of course they went over the hill, and you had about, I believe there was about 2,000 British regulars. I mean, these are, you know, dressed in red regulars, and about 700 American sort of militia. And they had all the, you know, the British come with everything they had to support about 2,700 people. I believe they have 165 wagons. That's a lot of wagons, right? I mean, you're not going to surprise anybody with 2,700 people, 165 wagons, plus artillery, which is, you know. So this all happened, and the British went up the hill, and they started to go down the hill, and they ran into the Indians. And they actually, it was kind of like a mistake, they bumped into each other. And the British assumed the position and fired. And the Indians thought, well, that's not so good, I could get shot. So they, of course, ran around them, got behind them on the wings, and slaughtered. 900 British regulars were killed, and about 2/3 of them were scalped alive. That's what the Indians did. And it was such a shocking surprise that it's literally scared the hell out of the British Army. And, you know, these American, you know, colonists over here, they all of a sudden realized, hey, these people could lose. Because what happened over there wasn't what happened over here. So eventually you had this, you had this revolution that was really driven by smuggling. I don't know if you know this, that the big business in the colonies, of course, was smuggling, so you didn't have to pay the taxes. And the British decided they wanted to crush that. You hear about the throwing the tea overboard. That was just putting a tax on something that everybody did just to make them extremely unhappy and, you know, argumentative. And so out of nowhere, the Americans defeated the greatest power in the world. But we also had the French that helped us. So all of a sudden, 1776, we have a Declaration of Independence, and the British leave, right? And the next thing that happens is all the states start fighting amongst each other. So you have these states, you have Articles of Confederation, they fight. Matter of fact, if you're Maryland and I'm New Jersey, I charge a tariff on all the trade that goes to you, and you charge a tariff back to me. So all of which they hated about the British, they started doing to each other, and so that really drove the Constitution. All of a sudden you had a Constitution, and I think that was 1787, isn't it? 1787?
What, tell me what you're
The Constitution, U.S. Constitution.
1770,
1780.
81.
81, okay. 87, I think it's.
Well, it started in 81, yes,
Yeah,
right.
they passed it,
Actually,
so-
went to 91.
Yeah, so anyway, so between this sort of defeating the most powerful country in the world, Americans immediately, sort of took the lessons from the British, and between 1891 or 1887, 1791 or 1787, had 6 financial crises up to 1847. The most powerful, richest part of the United States, the only thing that really made money was the South, because they dominated cotton in the world. Now, at the time, the Americans kept having these financial crises. The British ran the world with the Bank of England. And they had 60 to 70 tons of gold. The entire gold supply in the world was 4,600 tons. Over 15,000 years, it was 4,600 tons. And of course, the British had, the best bank of that. And then they discovered gold in California. In the first year after discovery, the U.S. Treasury picked up 85 tons of gold. Now, 60 to 70 was the British Empire. In the next 5 years, America had 400 tons of gold in its treasury. And that kind of mattered because you end up with a civil war. And one of the reasons that you end up with a civil war is all of a sudden America wasn't so reliant on the South. The South's cotton was the only thing that really worked. And now you had this new thing, and you had this difference. Even during the Civil War, America had so much gold continue to come from California into the treasury that in 1862 they started to build the railroads to the West Coast. You could afford to have a war, the first really industrial war in the world, because that's what it was. It was done by trains and done by really heavy equipment or artillery and such like that. It was an industrial war. But at the same time the North was having this industrial war, they were building railroads to California, because without California, America didn't work.
Wow.
And over a 45-year period, this thing just kept bigger and bigger and better and better and bigger and bigger and better and better. And you're in Placer County, right? Okay? And then it kind of ran out. And before it ran out, you had a giant real estate crash in California. About 45 years, from 1848 to to somewhere around 1890, 93. You had a real estate crash first in California in the late 1880s, and then all of a sudden it took the whole country down. That's how important California was. But just as it was going down and America was suffering a huge, an absolutely huge depression, probably worse depression than the 1930s, some guy in Beverly Hills, don't you love it, right? What would be Beverly Hills, with a pick and shovel, slant mined down to oil, and found the greatest oil deposit in the world. Matter of fact, California, between this guy, he found this in 1892, and really got California going by, say 1900, is the largest producer of oil in the world. we'd be the largest country producing oil in the world. Now, Texas kind of caught on later and caught up, but America was driven out of this Great Depression by California. And that oil thing, you know, we went to war against Japan because we weren't just supplying the world oil, we were supplying the Japanese Empire and the British and everybody else, and the Chinese. We're supplying everybody oil. And then all of a sudden we end up in war. You know, first we had a depression. California let us in because oil sort of slowed down and you had sort of a crash. Once again, real estate crash. And then you came out of that in the war. And in the war, California produced 63% of all of the airplanes produced for World War II. U.S. produced more than half of all of the oil exported to the warring countries. And this is where you live. You live in California. And at the end of the war, all of a sudden you had another run, and you started in the late 30s, you kept going, you went all the way up until the 70s, and then it ran out of gas, right? Oil peaked, and then it came down. And then you had this thing in 1978 called Prop 13. Remember it? And what happened, Prop 13 was the California Revolution against high taxes. And that brought Reagan, and that brought the idea that you would cut taxes hard, especially on investment. You know, people were mad after the Great Depression because the stock market crashed. But by cutting taxes on capital gains, the lowest point in the world of any major country, all of a sudden you kicked off a technology boom. And guess where that technology boom was centered? Right here. That was about semiconductors and a whole big... So you've kind of like seen this up and down. Now you're sort of at the end of another era, right? I'm going to show you these pretty predictable 45-year eras. California goes down first and drags everybody with it. And first slide. Are you there, Mark? Okay, back here. All right. This is COVID-19 hospitalizations. You see it kind of going here. Now, the green is
You can take
deaths.
that mic with you.
Yeah, okay. The green is deaths, and the blue are new cases, and the yellow are hospitalizations. Hospitalizations gone up some, but deaths have come back up to a high, right? New cases are a record. This is killing off old folks pretty good. But what's common about these old folks getting killed off? Diabetes, COPD, and heart problems. You probably don't know this, but people talk about how the flu isn't, this is much worse than the flu. Well, it is much worse than the flu as a defined term, because the flu, they don't report people who die over 60 of the flu. You know why? Because they don't die from the flu. The flu wears you down, you get pneumonia, and you faceplant. That's really what it's all about. So, we're seeing this great hospital, great pandemic. Next slide. And, it happens to be coming at the end of the year. How many people here understand what copays are? There's virtually no surgeries in America. I used to run hospital companies. This is one of the ones I turned around. There's virtually no surgeries in hospitals in the first 3 months of the year because nobody wants to pay the copay. Once they get the copays done, which is usually about July, the calendar picks up. So that every year you see doctors take vacations January, February, because, other than emergencies, there's not a lot of work. And this is what also has happened in America. Total surgeries, which is interesting, really haven't gone up that much since 1981, have they? I think they were 1920 and 1981, and maybe they're 26 or 27 billion, last year. But what's interesting is the number of surgeries inpatient has gone down, and the number of surgeries outpatient has gone up. So what would happen if you were a hospital manager and you had a pandemic? You like the pandemic, don't you? Because you have all of this excess capacity in America in hospitals. Some of it's been taken down, but quite a bit's still there. But the number of inpatient hospital surgeries are down. And that's really what emergency rooms are really used for. That's what operating theaters, that's what intubation and all that's about, usually surgeries. So next slide. Now, but something's really different here, right? This isn't like a normal flu. I understand it's the coronavirus. 25% of all colds are one of 7 coronaviruses. It's been around, they think, since 4000 BC. It's nasty stuff, but it's the kind of stuff that's been around. And sometimes a new one comes out and it's a lot stronger. Maybe that's what this is. But when you look at this particular cycle, something's really different here. And the something really different here is the growth of government gross debt in the world has taken off again. It pretty much had flattened out, and now it's taken off again. And as it took off again, one country is being pounded, and that's the United States. Here's Trump but this is the exchange rate of the US dollar versus other currencies. I would call that a bull market. Thank you, President Trump, right? The US dollar is becoming the strongest currency in the world because we were crushing China. I have to be an expert in China. I actually lecture to the Chinese government. They found out I do a certain kind of economic analysis, and I had said, 5 years ago that China was going to get crushed because of fracking. If you take a look at oil, you take a look at energy. Energy is 13.5% of the cost of manufacturing, and labor is 8.5%. Now, most of manufacturing, I'm sure there's manufacturers here, I'm not going to slight you, but I'm saying because I've been one, most of it is purchased product. Either purchase raw material or sub-assembly. What you're really in the business for is turn in a factory. And that's how fast you can turn the product over. And theoretically, energy costs are even across the world. They're a commodity, right? But oil's pretty damn heavy, right? It's a liquid. It's not something you're going to put on a plane and fly around. So America from 1870 to 1970 had energy costs 1/3 of the cost of the world. And we crushed everybody. This has nothing to do with the Protestant work ethic. People work hard all over the world. Something was different. But you had this incredible run of American dominance. That's good for regular people, right? Your dollar goes farther, your money buys more. Matter of fact, not only does your money buy more, wages on rising currency means there's wage pressures on the upside. There's 2 kinds of inflation. There's price inflation and there's wage inflation. Price inflation, that's the kind of inflation that makes you poor and there's wage inflation. This kind of inflation makes you rich. And the way it works in corporations, I know a lot of guys want to differ with me. Rising wages means there's demand for my product, demand for the skills and labor. And that's what Trump had going on. You can look at where he drove it. It's gone from about exchange around 89, is an index number, 89, to a high, I think it got up to about 103. So America became 15% more wealthy. America became much, much more competitive for its labor. Businesses were moving to America. This whole de-outsourcing was happening. And then the coronavirus hit. And you can see where the coronavirus just crushed this, right? You can see where the debt internationally went up. And you can see what's really driven the politics. This may be good for you. Do you think this was good for the Fortune 500s who'd made $7 trillion of investment, mostly in China? I mean, a factory that's not working is called a paperweight, right? That's how big this move was. Next slide. And who's really getting hurt on this? You can see where it's regular people. Restaurant, bars, beauty salons, travel, hospitality. Look at the pain they've suffered. These are people who can't pay rent in December. 61% of restaurants in America can't pay their rent. I mean, these people can't afford to go out, but they don't have anything else they do. This is what they do. I mean, even home services and such like that, all of that is a tremendous hit, and it's hitting regular people. These are regular folks that can't pay rent for a business. This is what America's really driven on, because about 65% of all new jobs are produced by small business. So 2 out of every 3 new jobs in America produced by small business. Next slide. Now, here's the rent tracker nationally, and as you can see, from May all the way through December in 2019, it averaged about, in the 80% range, and in the coronavirus this year, it's averaged about in the 80% range, because Trump supported a stabilization program, and instead of sending money to government, which historically all recessions, you send the money to government, and then they take care of the people, right? Well, the history of that has been they take care of themselves. This time they actually took care of the people. But something dramatic happened after November. Individuals, on December 6th, the percentage of individuals making rent payments dropped to 95%. Elections mean something. Can you go back to the slide before? Slide before this? Elections mean something. You started to recover here in October and November, and it means something. Next slide. 2 slides. One more, yeah. Okay. California is leading the United States in a new rise on unemployment rates. So, for whatever they want to talk about, this V recovery you hear, or all this kind of stuff, it isn't working so good, is it? Because you see, if we're going down to election day, the week of November 8th, elections mean something. Next slide. Okay, this is called you hear this term K recovery. You may have heard that term K recovery? That means, the poor slobs on the bottom who do industrial travel entertainment and food service, they're going down, and the professional class is going up. So you see the stock market hitting new highs? That's big companies, especially tech companies, that are able to now, the best thing that can happen to them is you shut it down and everything goes digital, and that's what's happened. Next slide. Okay, San Francisco, K-recovery, right? Technology's going to win, we're the good guys, we've got this all going. Why is rent collapsing? Down 27% since June 2019. It may look good on the outside, but you're having an income collapse in America. The small 1% or 2% that really have control of huge assets and are really part of the Fortune 500, people who can do globalism and it works for them, they are coining it. The rest of America is getting hammered. Next slide. This is, let me see what's this on. Okay, this is the state's financial position, cash flow. And the difference in me is I don't talk about, profits and losses, because I've actually run businesses. I talk about cash flow, making payroll. It's a very big deal to people who need payroll. That's what you do when you run companies. And what you can see here is these are the cash changes on a year-to-year basis, going all the way back to 1940. Okay, there really aren't very many periods in American history where you've actually had government have negative cash flow negative, and you had it in 2001 because somebody flew planes into buildings. But it came right back, right? And in 2009, you had that. It almost all came back the next year, and it went up. This is 2020 right here. Cash flow for government is down about 1.5%. A lot of that has to do with the fact that your house is appraised according to whatever it was last year. Your income, if you make a lot of money, you have to pay what's called quarterly estimated taxes. You have all this stuff that's still there, but you are on the cusp of the greatest collapse in state budgets since the Great Depression. The estimate nationally is down 11.2%. And of course, who's going to be the leader? California. Next slide. Okay. This is California is very, very hardwired, right? It has benefited over the last 25 years from China growing by 20 times. Over 50% of all of the movie tickets sold in 2019 were sold in China. Think about this. One country dominated the growth. And if you're in that kind of coastal place, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Sacramento is part of the state, you've been really doing very, very well. Even if the rest of you are sort of picking it with the chickens. I grew up in Reading, that's what we call it when you have a hard time. Picking it with the chicken. Now, these are the last 3 recessions. This is what happened to government budgets. And of course, government budgets talked about payroll. So the number of people in each one of it's it's hard to see. Each one of the last 4 recessions, goes into recession, government payroll stays there. Goes into expansion, government payroll slowly rise. Something's already starting to happen. This is the most radical hit to government employment, state employment, since the Great Depression. It's already happening, you just don't see it yet. Next slide. Now, this is a map of exports and imports of electricity. You know, now you can wield electricity from one state to another state. It's pretty expensive because, you know, you've got to use process to keep it up, keep the grid going. California right now is the largest importer of electricity in America. The state that created the oil boom that drove America for 100 years is now the largest importer of electricity because we don't produce energy, we buy it. The most amazing thing is Pennsylvania is the largest exporter of electricity. Now, isn't that kind of, you know, I thought they were the ones who were analog and we were digital. So this whole thing is flipped. And you know, the next highest importer is Ohio. You know, there's not a lot of natural gas and oil in Ohio. Next slide. And there you have it. California is leading on the downside a tremendous crash in government revenues. This is not like any recession that you've seen in your lifetime. Did anybody born before 37? Anybody born before 37? I wasn't. This is California's cash flow pattern during the year. Now, every other state has these things called reserves that actually are real bank accounts. California has reserves that are trend accounts. Trend, yeah. Because we know these revenues will be there, right? We know the trend. We've been seeing this for 20, 25 years going like this for California. California's cash intake over the last 25 years went from $47 billion to $305 billion. Wow, right? So we really don't need to have reserves like other states do. There's a couple other states that kind of run their business the same way. Illinois, Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York. So 47 to 305 is a lot, right? The reason it's so big is Nancy Pelosi. She's an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur, yeah. She's like one of these kids operating, you know, out of a Starbucks that becomes the biggest billionaire on the planet. She mines the U.S. federal government. The U.S. federal government. California has 10.5% of the number of Americans, you know, or I should say residents. Okay, 10.5% of the number of residents gets 33% of all welfare payments and 31% of all Obamacare payments. This, you know, 105-pound chick boxes up over her weight, trust me. She gets almost a third of all federal support payments. The other states are very aware of this, but she's got the juice. And the reason she has the juice is California has the largest number of elected congressmen, right? In California, I think isn't it fifth? Yeah, let me see. It's somebody give me right 54, right, Lodge?
Yeah, that's correct.
54. They had 47 Democrats. There's only 435, 435, right?
435.
435 Congress people. And California had 45 Democrats. So it's usually kind of like about split, 220, 210 or something kind of like that. So one time the Democrats have more, they have less, but it's pretty much 200 plus is where it is. If you're from California and you're a Democrat, you had 45 votes on every budget. You dominated the Democrats. Nobody was even close. But this election, they lost 5. And what's more important is that California is absolutely tooled to have all of this money coming in. Our real reserves compared to other states are 2% of budget. Most other states, average in the United States, about 16%. They went through that 2008, 2009 thing. In the 2008, 2009 thing, California had about a $42 billion deficit. And because good old Nancy was there, she got the feds to write her a check. So once again, California, 2% reserve, fastest growth. We don't need real reserves. But during the year, just like anybody else, during the year anybody runs a business, sometimes you have more cash, sometimes you have less cash, right? And so this is the pattern of cash flow during the year for California in an average year. In an average year, you're going to start out the year with about 10 or 11 billion dollars of surplus cash. Now, that cash is going to stay, kind of trending up, and then in November, October especially, you're going to dive big time. And you're going to dive, excuse me, I got this backwards, excuse me. You have a cash deficit of about 11 billion to start. And that cash deficit is going to get bigger. It's going to get the biggest point here in October. I got these backwards. So October is California's cash flow hell. Then they get your property tax. People pay property taxes, right? They pay other kinds of taxes. They pay quarterly estimated taxes. You get a big boom in property taxes and collection. Goes straight up. Right now, it's happy days in Sacramento. But, the second or third week of January, it dives. And it takes the biggest dive of the year to a deficit, not as big as the one from October, but a pretty damn big deficit. On a regular year, California will run, somewhere around, in October, they normally run about 25 billion deficit. And in January, it's usually like 10 or 12. In a slow year, there might be a few billion dollars more. California's deficit this October was $65 billion. Now, remember I said 2025 is a lot, right? 3 times more. The February deficit, which normally is, somewhere around 10, 11 billion, will be 40 to 50 billion dollars this year. And this is with California going all in to not spend money. The reason your children are at home is by shutting down the schools. California saved $18 billion through December 31st. They have to pay the teachers, but they don't have to pay for all the other costs. Remember those prisoners? You just heard a judge wants to send 50% of prisoners out of jail. Did you hear about this?
Yep.
Okay. California had already released 45% of its prisoners, down to a population around 134,000 when coronavirus hit. That's a lot of people. That was, like over 100,000 people have already been put on the blocks. And really, the people in prison are the bad boys now. The really bad boys. Bad boys and bad girls. Some of you girls can really there's some strong participating girls when it comes to crime. But, you know, you had 134,000 population. California cut that population from 134,000 to 93,000 right now. That saved them $4 to $5 billion. This judge want to cut it 50%. He's going to save another $5 billion. They are going all in because they are that desperate. Now, let's go back to the first slide. Okay, go forward. One more. Next. 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 Okay, this is it. Now, this is 2020. Nationally, state revenues are down 1.5%. Does the numbers I'm talking about here, you know, California's admitted on a $135 billion budget, they had an $85 billion deficit. They admitted this in, I believe it was in August. We think it got to around $107 billion. That's not 1%. On a $135 billion budget, $107 billion cash disappeared. That's cash flow you're not going to have. It's about an 80 to 90% loss. And that's the good time. Because this year, 2021, it's going to get bigger. The whole country is going to, all of the government is going to have this hit. These numbers are nothing that you've seen in your lifetime, nothing that the people who, you know, were elected as Democrats and New Democrats came in on December 7th. And they came in and they got their chair, and they sat in their chair, and, you know, this has been going on for 25 years. It's been all good, right? China went up 20 times. Revenues, you know, from 47 to 305 billion. I mean, could you imagine? And Nancy Pelosi, she gets almost a third of all federal spending. And you know, and she had a deal with Trump the week before the election for a stimulus program. $1.88 trillion. Trillion. That deal was driven because California was going to get $47 billion. Billion. It's about half of their problem, right? That's a lot. She turned that deal down. The current deal on the table gives California $8.6 billion. So 48 to 40, it's actually 47.6 to 8.6. She lost $39 billion, or 80% of the cash she was going to get to play politics. This afternoon, Alexandria Ocasio said it's time for Nancy and Chuck Schumer to go. Well, you might have agreed. AOC was in a, you know, working class neighborhood in Brooklyn, and Amazon was going to come in and get really almost $5 billion subsidies. And the first thing they did is they were going to tear down all the buildings and apartments in the area and throw all the people out. I understand there's going to be some taxes, there'll be some money, but how'd you like to get thrown on the bricks in New York? She knows how to talk to people. We have, as conservatives, we actually have a lot in common with progressives. They understand that we're all getting robbed. They viscerally understand that China's won and we've lost, You know, I like to say, it's Christmas, right? Jesus got sold out for 30 pieces of silver. China Biden got 30 million. Real number, right? So we're coming into an absolute existential crisis. Sitting in this seat here, it seems, you talk to your neighbors and such like that, California can't fail. It hasn't failed. Well, it actually did fail. In 1935, in the Depression, the only state that went bankrupt was California. It was that bad off. And then, of course, came the war and more oil, and off they went again, producing airplanes and everything else, and technology. So the cycles in California are great on the upside, really hard on the downside. We are not at the bottom of the California cycle. We are going into the cycle. Your life might not be driven by government spending. Their life is. Their tax collection from globalization is falling apart. Their costs are going straight up. They're at threat from having the other 49 states take away the 20% extra cash that California gets because Nancy Pelosi has the power. And that's where we stand right now. All of this, any one of these things would be bad. Add them together, it's horrible. So that's why I joined the New California movement in 2018. I believed at the time, I wrote a piece for American Thinker, and they actually used the title, which Jerry Brown left Gavin Newsom the steaming load. And that's all you gotta know. I mean, Gavin Newsom, I know Gavin Newsom. I was treasurer of Orange County, and I was involved in the bankruptcy reorganization, the pension restructure. I sat on the 5-member Treasurers Advisory Committee. I know these people. I know how they play. Gavin Newsom he's pretty. He's nice. He's not, he's... Jerry Brown's the heart. Jerry Brown's heart. Jerry Brown's a real businessman. Gavin Newsom, not so much. He's pretty. He's like these people that just came in the 7th of December, these new assemblymen and new state senators. And all of a sudden, he didn't know until August that there was going to be a deficit. He literally was shocked. Because in his world, there was no bad news. This was just going to be a normal cycle. We'll come out, no. This is a cycle that's going to be bad this year. It's going to be really bad next year. And in California, the Legislative Analyst Office, you can see that 2021 for the nation, this big, deep orange thing, is going to be really bad. But then it's going to come out in 2022. The Legislative Analyst Office, which is a nonpartisan group of financial guys like me, they're really authentic. They just do numbers. That's all they do. They'll tell you good, they'll tell you bad, they'll just give you the numbers. They don't put spin on it. They came out last week and said California now has a structural deficit for the next 5 years. That's on top of coronavirus and everything else. That's before they lose Nancy Pelosi and get hammered on their cash flow. California is now in a structural deficit because the business model of California has expired. The urban, services-oriented, tech, creativity, global, 60% of all of the trade, container traffic trade for America comes through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. 60%. There's only one state that's really about globalism, that's it right here. That is fading. And California will have a $17.5 to $18.5 billion structural deficit for each of the next 5 years. So it's not a 1 year and then come out of it. For California, they're in this problem that's not going away. How do you fix the problem? Well, when something you've done stops working, you try to go to something that can work, right? What worked in California before the 1990s was manufacturing. California was the #1 manufacturing state in the country. It was the #1 agriculture state in the country. Those were the power. Now it had technology, it had entertainment and movies and creative things like that, but it was the big manufacturing structure that drove California. Because remember, we used to produce the vast majority of airplanes. There are no airplane factories in California anymore. They're all gone. So old California, during this period of the heydays, has driven their structure, the way they're built, into a really entangled structure that's hardwired. When I say hardwired, California's had 640 constitutional changes. About half of those have come in the last 25 years. California's had on the books since 1970 to build 6 dams. How many dams they build? None. 0. All of the engineering, all of the geological, all of the cost estimates, all of the federal participation, all of that is in place. And they built 0. And one of the reasons they built 0 is it's so hard to get anything done in California because the lawyers and the interest groups, instead of lobbying, they got constitutional changes. So even if old California wants to change and go back to manufacturing, because China is over. People don't realize that they got old. Have you ever told you this? They're going to decline by 200 million people in the next 15 years. They're old. They're dying off. Old California, so when this existential crisis hits, old California is going to run to the federal government. They're doing it right now. Give us a check. Give us $100 billion. Maybe we'll need $200 billion. We're in this together. Well, maybe not so much. And if they don't get a check from the federal government, they can't borrow money from Wall Street. California does not have an audited financial statement. Anybody work in a business and have an accountant? You go to a bank, what's bank? First thing they ask for?
Financials.
Pardon?
Financials.
Right, audited financials.
Yep.
At least if you're a small business, at least I want an accountant's name and phone number financials. So that little son of, you know what? Banker's going to talk to him directly, and he's going to understand everything he needs to know. California does not have an audited financial statement because the controller in the state of California won't sign it. Because by signing it, it's she has to do what's called an affirmation and verification. Affirmation and verification. Those are the kind of things that when you sign, you own it. Would you like to own this? So, California really can't borrow money from Wall Street anymore because Wall Street wants to lend money to people who can actually pay it back. That's the detail probably, right? And even if they loaned it to California to try to do something productive, do you really think that old California could build 6 dams?
No.
They're importing California's importing 30% of all of the electricity generated that we consume. 30%. We have 20% solar, and that's just great in the summertime when there's, low demand in the daytime, high demand in the afternoon. So when the sun goes down, happens to be with the highest demand, isn't it kind of like hot at night? When people get home from their jobs, they want to cool their house. Okay, so you got to have standby natural gas plants, and we don't have them anymore, so we import electricity all the way from Utah, and guess what kind of electricity it is? It's coal-based. The dirtiest power in America, we wheel that stuff in. So if you can build 6 dams, and you can build a whole new electric grid, and you can encourage oil and gas development in California, matter of fact, light that fuse, you could set off $1 trillion borrowing to build the infrastructure out to support this. That's new California. We'll show our plan to old California. It doesn't matter because they can't do it. They know they can't do it. So it's going to happen in February or in October. Those are the times the greatest stress is on the state of California. But it also could happen in any of 5 other states that are just as bad as worse. If any one of those 5 states has an existential financial crisis and fails, stop making their bond payment, it's going to be like dominoes. And it's not the rest of America that has this problem. It's really 5 states. In California, the next biggest one is New York. We're at about 107 billion, they're 67 billion. The next after that is Illinois at 24 billion. So these are really, really big numbers. Any one of these states, New Jersey or Connecticut, fails, the whole thing's just going to fall apart. One way or the other, California will fail. And when they fail, they're going to meet New California. Unlike others who've tried the Jefferson and people like that, who said they're going to vote themselves a state, got to read the Constitution. Constitution allows you to form a state with the cooperation of Congress, both houses of Congress, and the state legislatures. Why is the state legislature gonna give us a state? Because when this puppy goes down, there's gonna be about a $300 billion liability for pensions. Immediately. And those pensions, people start suing for things like that. There may be personal liability associated with the money spent instead of funding pensions. All of that, lawyers have a way of, trying to get all the blood out of the turnip. So if you're a little assemblyman or senator, you're going to say, it wasn't me. Remember that kind of song, It wasn't me. My favorite song when I was a kid. Who's making love to my old lady while I was out making love? I didn't do it. I didn't do that. I didn't do that. It was Gavin Newsom. He fooled me. They've got the perfect sucker to wear this right now. I mean, whether you throw him out of office or whatever, it doesn't matter. No one can work out these numbers. I know how to do real big workouts. You can't. There's nothing you can do here. You got to have cash flow. You got to have some new form of cash flow. New California can do that. We can build the $1 trillion of infrastructure. We can light, huge amounts of new water, and for which we will produce electricity that you currently pay in California, an average about 20 cents a kilowatt hour. We can generate it through natural gas with state resources for about 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. We will sell it to you for 7 and 8. We'll sell it to, right. We're going to generate, for you farmers, we're going to generate 1/3 more water. That stuff's valuable. That means you'll have a consistent structure and growing season. Right now, you go like this with water, you know, you gotta find out. You build 6 dams in California, you won't have a drought for 40 to 50 years. It may stop raining, but we have enough water storage no matter what. We would reach out and charge all the groundwater. We'd have enough water so that we can probably increase agricultural production in California by 25%. And more importantly than increase it is, anybody farmer in here? Yeah, you know, consistency is a big deal, right? You got to take risk every year, right? You got to show up, plant your crop, if you had consistent, guaranteed water delivery, how important is that to you? Do you have riparian rights?
No.
Yeah. Some people have riparian rights, right? They got the rights of the water right there in the old days. Even those people now are getting hammered. But if you had consistent deliveries, could you dramatically increase your production? And if that cost of those deliveries dropped by about 50%, because water is food, right? That's what New California is. We will kick off the greatest manufacturing and agricultural boom just like the last ones. You know, the outsourced model, globalization model is over. It's just, you know, China doesn't have oil. America has fracking. We have oil. It's cheap oil. They can't compete with us. California ought to be the center of that competition, and that's what we plan to do. So, the only thing I can tell you is that I don't know when that day is going to be that they collapse, but they're going to collapse. We're getting calls from people who, you know, a lot of people know me because of being in the financial business. I love the calls I get. Hey Chris, how you doing? Haven't talked to you in a while. Yeah, for 10 years. So, how you doing? I hear you're kind of like retired now and kind of working on it. I heard something about this California, something about, you mean New California? Yeah, that's what it is, New California State, isn't it? I understand you want to do some infrastructure investment. Yeah, we're talking about that. Did you do that, right? Yeah, we on Wall Street do that, yeah. You know, can we start, you know, we don't want to, you know, we do business with California right now, so we can't be seen, you know, do anything against our customer. Oh, we're not going to bother them. We're not going to be against your customer. Can we talk and learn more? That's what's going on right now. We're getting calls from the other side of the legislature that understand this is bad. This is bad. And they just want to know what we're up to. They still think they'll get a bailout. They still think that China Biden's going to write him a check. Do you really think a guy's going to be able to write him a check with the investigations that are booming right now? Even if he gets in as president, I mean, you understand that Trump is declassifying everything. Do you think this is the Biden's first slurp at the trough? I mean, so I think that you're going to have chaos in D.C., and that does not sound like a formula to write hundreds of billions of dollar checks for California. And that doesn't sound like the other states are going to be willing to continue to do the Nancy Pelosi, you know, unfair allocation of cash. So we are building an organization. This has been going on for almost 7 years now. We're at the point where we're writing a constitution. We're at the point where, you know, we've done this literally out of our pockets with small money for a damn good reason, because I didn't want to blow it by saying we're going to succeed. I thought we would succeed in October of 2021. I actually talked about this at the convention in October of 2018. I said California will run out of cash and fail in October of 2021. I didn't know that this particular problem with the coronavirus would make it worse, but it's there. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And, you know, I try to be involved in the financial side mostly. You know, there's other people here that know more about the political side or some of the other things going on, but I'm about money. Because at the end of the day, this is the biggest business in the world. California's spending for government, state, and cities, including the federal grants, is $661 billion. It's the biggest corporation on the planet. Little Walmart, you know, that thing with 11,700 stores and, you know, 275,000 people, full-time workers, is $520 billion. So we're 25% bigger than Walmart. They have a business that actually, you know, is growing. California has a business that's shrinking. So I'm happy to answer any questions. That's our story, and that's what we plan to do. Russ.
The last time we talked, you talked, mostly, you did mention that because of the coronavirus and the prepaid taxes
Right.
was going to, at 110%, was going to severely affect 2021 income because they have prepaid so much. Would you
Well,
agree?
2000, the way California works is, how many people pay quarterly estimated tax? Some of you? If you pay quarterly estimated tax, you've got to go by a formula that pretty much says you're going to pay the same, almost the same taxes no matter whether your business collapsed or not. The next year after that, it's going to be dramatically lower. And matter of fact, you might get a big refund for overpaying. And that's when you see this sort of down 1%. It works like that all over the United States. That's why nationally states expect 11.5% drop. They're not only going to lose profits, they're going to have people go for recapture. They overpaid their taxes. So they get, it's like anything. California got a good push, a little extra help at the end of the game. Now they're going to pay for it even harder. So they took money from 2021 and put it in 2020. So it's just going to be worse, Russ. I mean, this whole scenario was about worse gets worse gets worse. And and that was before Pelosi was on the bubble, right? Because she's on the bubble now.
You mentioned anti-Pelosi, and there was something about the budget of $47 billion. It went to $300 billion.
No, there was.
I didn't understand that.
No, in the $1.88 trillion deal offered by the Trump administration as a stimulus before the election, that deal would have given California a $47 billion check.
Okay. And she only got 8 because.
Well, that deal's gone.
Okay.
Now they're in the post-election deal, and it's got to be that other states are hammering California over this, because the current deal, if it gets done, gives California only $8.6 billion.
Wow.
I thought we were, Democrats, I thought we were in this together, right? No. In hard times, it's about miles. Yes. Yes.
Okay, say if the military does come in and take over California.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to say something about that. I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't think it needs to happen. I believe that this thing's about money. Worse than having the military is missing payroll. That's the ultimate crisis, because things start shutting down. Safety things start shutting down. There's a vendor who provides all of they sell software packages for streetlights to everybody. There's one vendor. And they have, you sell the package, you buy the package. But then you buy the maintenance and the update, right? That guy in October said he's not taking any slow pay anymore. and he shut it down. And they had to write him a really big check. I'm not going to say what it is, but it was a really big check. Because if there was ever an accident and any lawyer found out that California's streetlights didn't have a maintenance contract, they could have been wrong, and the city or the state or the county would have the liability. There are a number of vendors now who have stopped saying, I'll go slow pay. They're saying, pay. That's what a real existential crash is they can't even pay those people. They're already not paying everybody else. They're not doing the schools, they're not doing the prisoners. When they say, defund the police, it's not about black folks. It's about cash. They got to find some way to stop spending money.
What do you recommend for people on California pension?
Well, okay, I believe that New California is going to pay your pension. How are we going to pay it? We're going to sell cheap water and cheap electricity to old California, and they're going to mark it up. They're going to screw over their, what's it called? They're zero carbon people. They'll blow them off. Sustainable energy, they're going to blow off the solar. Solar is about, with the cost of variability, is about 6 times more expensive than natural gas, and wind's about 4.5 times more expensive. I understand they're going to get better batteries, but I've been doing wind turbines since 1970s. Remember they had them in the 70s?
Yeah.
Anybody know about bug juice? I did. Bug juice. Turbines go around like that. Turns out that insects like to ride on the turbines. Why? Who the hell knows? But they ride on the turbines and on the blades. You ever seen these things wind blowing like hell, and it's not turning?
Yeah.
Bug juice. The bugs get sucked into it and absolutely melt stainless steel. Anybody in the wind business? There must be some reason they're not turning when the wind's blowing, right? They really haven't solved that issue. They got better at it, but they haven't solved that issue. That's natural gas. They figured that out. Yep.
So say New California is up and running. What is old California going to look like?
Well, old California, if you take a look, it's going to be about 20 million people each. It turns out that about 10 to 12% of the land mass of California is 20 million people, and the other half is 20 million people. A little less, maybe. People, you talked about pensions, right? Okay. It turns out that old California will only have about 43% of the employees. In New California, have about 57%. Because of our land mass, the employees will be there, we'll use them. But old California is going to be about 57% of the cost. Or excuse me, more than that. So it's going to actually be 67% of the cost. In New California, about 33% of the cost. Because we're going to leave behind the real expensive overhead and infrastructure. We're going to keep the people. Because you need people, right? It's not the people that have the cost, it's the overhead stacked on top of it. So if you're making $455,000 as an administrator in California, living in Sacramento, we're probably going to wave at you. That's our business model. But we're going to use this water and electricity as the negotiating tool when it comes to a deal. Somebody's got to pay those pensions. They're actually not guaranteed by law. In the Detroit bankruptcy, a federal judge says they're not guaranteed by law. But guaranteed, if they didn't pay them, that the legislators would get hammered. If nothing else, the cost of lawyers would destroy them. And I think they'd have liability. The leading people in the legislature knew these numbers. They knew what they were doing. So in a bankruptcy, this won't be a quote unquote bankruptcy, it'll be what's called an administration, like they did in Puerto Rico, because they already just did this in Puerto Rico. And you'll have a guy who looks a lot like a judge, because he is a judge, and he'll be the administrator, and he'll be looking at people out there and he's gonna say, do you have money? And there'll be people saying, well, we want to do this, I want to do that, and you go, do you have money? And they go, well, he goes, please sit down. He's gonna go, New California, do you have money? And I'll go, yes. And I'll whip out my plans and my investment banker support letters. And they will look at me and they say, well, you can go sit over here, because I want to talk, I want you to sit over here, because you have money. That's how these things work out. We're gonna have money. In the back.
I was going to ask you, I think you kind of answered the question already just now. I was going to ask you, what would the final triggering event be for that switch to begin to take place? Is that
Well, it's a default in safety spending. I mean, they're already, they tried to kick 50% more prisoners out. I would call that kind of crisis management, right? Already cut 36,000. Now you want to cut 50,000 more? Wow. Yes.
My Democrat friends want evidence that the state is going bankrupt. What would you suggest that I give them?
I can, the legislative analyst office just put out a report December 1st that said California has a structural deficit. That's on top of the other reports that said they have an $85 billion problem through June of next year.
Go to the comptroller.
No, go to the legislative analyst office, nonpartisan legislative analyst office. Send an email. Do you guys know Liz Ritchie? So on each of the calls, Liz usually gives her number. You can send an email there, and it comes back to me. I just can't take everybody's hitting me on emails. And a lot of people hate me too, by the way. You got to realize that you filed an amicus brief in the Texas lawsuit, and the Supreme Court accepted it. There were some very angry people about that. The Supreme Court would accept an alternative amicus brief. So you're no secret to anybody. They're talking about you. Everybody's sort of talking about this. Nobody wants to write a check.
Some friends and I were speculating that the first thing the public would see was something perhaps like a CalPERS collapse so that they couldn't make the pension payments. My question would be, from your charts and times, what would be your earliest guess CalPERS could default and your latest guess in time?
Well, CalPERS doesn't default until California defaults, then everybody tries to rush to retire. That day, they're all going to rush to retire, right? When you have people working, they're putting money into the system, they may be building up a lot of life, but they're putting money in, then they go this way, they want that money. The moment you have a financial crisis, thousands of people are going to put in their retirement the same day.
They
Like
already
a
have.
run on the bank.
Well, they are doing it now. It's sort of that's run on the bank, yeah. Well, it's a problem, it's not that problem. Okay? I mean, this is like when 5,000 to 7,000 people on the same day put in their request. Because, there's this thing called Moody's Credit Rating Service, and they rate you, and they only rate you for 12 months. So if they thought you're going to file bankruptcy 12 months in a day, but you're absolutely guaranteed to make it the next 12 months, A-rated. You're good until you're not good. That's the way the game's played.
CalPERS now.
Yes.
There's New California. Are
We're
they
gonna have a pension plan.
Pardon me?
We're gonna have a pension plan.
Are you?
Yep.
Yeah, but what about the people that have retired? Where
Um,
does that come from? The old California or the new
Well,
California?
that's what I'm telling you how this is gonna work. There'll be what's called, fresh start account. There'll be a new pension plan in California, for New California. But New California's way we're gonna take over the state is we're gonna do this deal that gives old California the cash flow to make sure they 100% make pensions good. They can't build these power plants, they can't build these dams, they couldn't do that infrastructure because they could never get it done like that. Our Constitution is you put the quarter in the slot and you hear the music. We're coming out of this thing hard and we're coming out of it big. And that's what we offer. We offer a guaranteed delivery of water, guaranteed delivery of electricity at low prices. And the old California can mark it up. That's what they'll do. To the urban core, this isn't that bad. You know, it's people like the farmer here, he really knows his cost. You know, electricity in the urban core isn't that big a deal when you're in the service business, right? I mean, you run computers and lights and things like that. You get out to manufacturing, you get out to agriculture, you get out to burning diesel and things like that, you know your numbers. So that's, you know, it's a business model that didn't work for the inner city, and they didn't need us. Now they're gonna need us. Yes.
Okay, so trying to get my head around the rollout of your, the leverage that you have
Right.
with utilities, and then your necessity, the things you need. You have to have the House and Senate, but you also have to have the legislation from California to agree.
The legislature, not the, don't need the governor, don't need the president, need the legislature for the United States and the legislature for the state.
And then, so getting them on board and agreeing to relinquish their resources to the new state.
Right.
The trade-off is gonna be that we're gonna cover the bonds, the deficit in the pension.
We're going to give them a cash flow vehicle that can cover that.
They don't
Now,
have to pay the-
they consider you a cost center. Why do they have fires in California? Because they don't want to invest in managing the forest.
Yeah.
Because they don't harvest the forest, right? To them, it's a cost center. You're a cost center. You don't make money for them. You're a burden to them. Their business is the city and tech and entertainment and all that, and you're just over there. They like your food, but it's, they think they kind of look at it and get it from somewhere else. We think we like your food and we'd like to get it from you. And we'd like you to really get the prices down, because if your volume goes up, your prices are gonna go down, right? You're gonna be more competitive. So it's water and electricity are the big drivers.
So my question leading to that would be is, I understand the utilities because we have the rural resources to do all we have the water, we have the ability.
We have the plans for 40 years.
Yeah, and so in order to, giving them the cash flow to pay their pension the primary incentive for them to sign on as fast as they can, or is there other sources of revenue? Do they need the extra $300 billion in other money too? Or is that the main thing?
They need a ongoing revenue stream in the future, not a single check, because they have a structural deficit already. They need a set of payments they can rely on for the next 20 years.
Are we gonna offer bonds for people to invest in the infrastructure?
Well, Wall Street will sell us bonds, sure, that's what we're gonna do.
So
We're gonna sell, these will be revenue bonds, not general obligation bonds. Unlike currently, California offers general obligation bonds, because they don't want to dedicate revenues. The train, remember the train, high-speed train, right? They built about 100 yards of track, right? Because they had to. They ran through 23 billion, that was never, you know, that was a general obligation bond because they were never gonna have the revenue. I don't believe they ever planned to actually build it. It was a way to get cash to pay for infrastructure that they hadn't paid for. In 1970, Jerry Brown was elected, 1972, I think it was. 76 or,
Took off in 77.
pardon, took off 77? Well, when he came into office, infrastructure spending in California was 17% of the budget. He took it to 3, and it never came back. If you added, you sort of, now, there's a lot of arguing that they were spending too much money on infrastructure, but we did have the best roads, the best electric, the best water, we had the best everything. But, yeah, I mean, you know, conveyance, all that stuff. You know, they just want to spend money on it. Yes, back row.
Where's the boundary? Where does it fall?
You can see the maps. I don't want to get into the politics of that because that's the cat fight. I'm only saying that the San Francisco, Silicon Valley Bowl, the Los Angeles Basin, and Sacramento Bowl are going to see themselves as urban. They're going to see themselves as that business model. Whether they have the cash flow or not, it's not going to change who they are. Right now, 33 of the 40 senators in the state of California are controlled by those 3 areas.
Yeah.
So, you know, only 7 cover all, you know, there's 58 counties in California. 7 state senators, I think they, you know, they really represent something like, you know, 46, 47 county. 40, they only represent 8 or 9 counties versus out of 58. Yet they have 3/4 of the votes in the Senate. That's the way it's structured. We're going to change that where each county is going to have a state senator.
Yes.
Each county will have 2 assembly people. So I understand that there may be some issues with the state legislatures about population, but that's the way we're going to go into it. So we want people, we want the area of California to all have rights, not just some areas. Yes?
Yeah, timber harvesting, mining, and seaports. What's New
Yes.
California going to do about that to create revenue?
Okay, we would like to get the Port of Long Beach. I don't know if we will or won't. You know, I'm just saying that we don't, but even if we don't, this is something that I don't need the Port of Long Beach. I need access to the Port of Long Beach. And I guarantee you what the Port of Long Beach does is it uses transportation. You know, boxes come in, boxes come out. Old California is going to be happy to take our manufacturing production for export and send it through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. We would like to have Long Beach. We don't have to have it. And the other question was?
Well, timber.
Timber, I'm up in, my family's originally from Reading.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when the state used to have a booming timber industry.
Yeah.
I'm up there visiting relatives, and we go out to, I think it's by one of the waterfalls, and the trains are going by. Absolutely huge long trains coming from where? Oregon. Bringing timber to California.
Yep.
You know, the current business model, if the prices of rent in San Francisco before this next big leg down are down 27%, that means people are leaving, right?
Yep.
So if you own property in the suburbs and you own property in the rural areas, your property is looking more valuable. It would be it would be more valuable and cheaper to buy if we didn't have, the average house in Southern California has a $252,000 essentially fees that cities charge. You know, from Los Angeles down to San Diego, about 252,000 is what all the entitlements cost. I mean, that money isn't about paying for streets and schools. That money's a revenue source. We're gonna make that more attractive, but more importantly, we would really like to generate, production in California. Now, California, you either burn it down, pay money, or you log it and make some sense of it. I understand there were some bad things done in the past, but what could be worse than the car fire? Ever seen a car fire? My family was up there. I'm looking, one of the wonderful things today you can watch from the satellite is your family gets killed. I mean, that thing was, you couldn't outrun the car fire. My parents were in Reading, and they'd been through this. I grew up in Reading when I was a kid. They got all organized, and they went out the garage, and they pushed the button. Nothing happened. Turned the electricity off from an 88-year-old man. Think an 88-year-old man can pull the conch and lift a garage door? Hell no. My mother, she's 89. They'd have burned it, 2 houses across the street and a house 2 up, burned down, and I'm watching this. I couldn't get a hold of them. Neighbor came down, guy just moved in a couple months, came down and opened the garage for them. Didn't know my parents. 3 doors up, he runs down the street because he knew there were some old folks down there.
Wow.
And he says, are you okay? Can I help you? Got the garage open. 36 hours later, I can't find my parents. I call every hotel. Call the Holiday Inn. My mother answers. Are you okay? We're having cocktails. Fires are California, right? But we're not gonna play that game anymore. We're gonna make some sense.
Okay, big business that's moving out of California, HP.
They'll all come back.
Have any of them contacted us to find out how far along we are, to give us support before they actually?
I'm not gonna talk about that, but I'll tell you that Taiwan Semiconductor wanted to build a $12 billion fab shop for 5 nanometer chips. $12 billion. That $12 billion plant would have been supported by about 50 other vendors. There's only one in the world right now, and it's in Taiwan. But they know you're supposed to come back to the U.S. They couldn't get California to prove it. They're moving to Scottsdale. We probably lost that one, but we'll get the other ones. Yeah, we like those guys. We like people that good jobs at good wages. What a concept.
So, your experience in Orange County with China coming in and...
Yeah, it was, people like to say it was China, and I maybe but it was the Democrats and Republicans were both on the money.
Yeah. So how do we stop that from happening?
Yeah,
This new opportunity?
China can't foreclose on anything. We could take all their bonds, all their investments, and we could nationalize them tomorrow. We did it with the Germans.
But wouldn't we want to have the opportunity for the local Californians to invest in these bonds?
Oh yeah, the one thing about Wall Street is they don't discriminate. They love green people, dead presidents.
Yeah.
So if you want to put some pension money in there, raise money, do that kind of infrastructure stuff.
Are
Yeah.
Californians going to have the opportunity?
Yes.
Prior to the rest of the world?
I'm not going to go on that one because right now I got a deal in hand. I'll let them do it the way they're going to do it, but this is going to be big money. It's going to be really big financing. It'll be the biggest thing, be the biggest infrastructure investment, and I'm sure they're going to look money every place. It's the interest rate that I care about.
So after the state basically implodes financially, and then
After their important vendors finally quit.
Right.
Yes,
So
rebel.
how long is it going to be? The hydroelectric and water are a big piece of this as far as generating money, right? How long is it going to take?
It'll take us about 8 years. It'll take us about 8 years to build to get 6 to 8 years to get the first dam up. And then they'll come in. But the way cash flow works, there'll be progress payments, there'll be a reserve account, and this cash will start flowing. That's, you know, we'll finance the working capital in the interim. And when you do this, remember that corporations don't move today. They gotta have a plan. And they gotta negotiate water rights and electrical rights and things like that. So we're gonna be forward selling to large corporations, big employers, big manufacturing, rights to energy at favorable cost, rights to water at favorable cost. So we'll have already started selling, we'll start negotiating that and get progress payments right away. Just like any other project finance. Yes?
Will this lecture be available anywhere online so that we can share it?
Sure, has somebody recorded it?
Right here.
It is right here.
Is that on Facebook Live? It will be on our Facebook page.
Yes.
Great.
You know, I generally don't get a chance to come out and talk to groups in the county levels. They have me come out in the conventions, and I do it there. I am writing a book, and one of the reasons I used to write at least 6 articles a week for Breitbart, Epoch Times, Huffington Post, American Thinker, you know, Wall Street Journal. I write for them all. I mean, I also lecture in universities to graduate students, but of course there's no universities right now. So I'm working hard to publish a book, which I hope to have out in February. And I think the title will be something along the line of, you know, New California, creating the new Golden State. And, you know, I slowed down on this because other people started talking to us. So nobody's screaming at me anymore. A year ago, they were all screaming at me. You're wrong, Chris. Never happened. You know, we'll fight you tooth and nail. Now we don't think it's really going to happen that way. But nobody I talk to believes that California is going to get out of this without an existential financial crisis. Can they get a check from China Joe? Maybe not. I just think it's really unrealistic. I don't think Nancy Pelosi is going to last 60 days. The moment she goes, huge money goes. Well, you know, I mean, you know, if you're a hospital or somebody like that, you know, all that, you know, those illegal aliens are revenue sources. The way the game was played with Nancy is California pays 10% of it, and the federal government pays 90% of it. So, you know, it's about $20 billion. So for $2 billion, you get 20. California was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Jerry Brown was the governor. And Jerry Brown, he cuts a deal to build a train, right? A train to nowhere. The moment he signed the piece of paper, he guaranteed that California would spend $2.3 billion. How much was the wire transfer check that came a week later? Come on, you know, you live here. Guarantee $2.3 billion sometime in the future. How much was the check you got in the mail by wire transfer? Come on, take a guess.
$100 billion.
Well,
I'm sorry, $100 million.
100 million? No, more than that. 8.7 billion. That is cool, isn't it? I signed a piece of paper that, you know, makes it liable for somebody else to spend $2 billion, and they send me almost $9 billion. Only in California. That's the power of Nancy Pelosi. Well, you know, thank you for coming tonight. You know, I know that Placer County is working hard on this. They appreciate your support. We need your skills. You know, join the organization. If you can, you know, become a member, that would be great. If you are a member, tell your friends, because we're over 100,000 now, and this is taken off. And we'd love to have you as part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did I tell you he was terrific? Was I right? You betcha. The best, the best. I've had the pleasure of hearing him a number of times, and each time is more edifying than the last, so doesn't get any better. I'm going to bring back Mark Lydell, who's going to fill in a couple things about what we're doing. We were talking about before Chris came in about the constitutions and when we can expect to present our case to the governments.
Perfect. I have two big takeaways. Lawyers and bug juice. That's the first, Chris. I like that.
I thought lawyers are bug juice.
We deserve that. We totally deserve that. So I'll tell you what my takeaway was. Because I've been involved in the stuff I talked about a little bit, trying to get ready for the Insurrection Act and getting ready for emergency constitutions. I sure like this plan a whole lot better. And I understand a lot more tonight about how bad we are and how that's going to work. I mean, I've heard all of it before, but tonight was really educational. And I think it was a lot more about what the reality is for California. And money, I think, is how it's going to happen. So we're still going to keep doing the stuff we're doing, because we don't know what's going to happen. There might be the Insurrection Act. We would be foolish not to get ready for it, so that's why we put together the restored Constitution. There may still come an opportunity to work with Congress and work with our state legislature, so we are absolutely putting together our Constitution to be ready for it. But I do think that the plan is going to be, money's going to talk, and that's how we're going to find a way out of this. There were several questions that were asked. I think you had asked about the borders. I think a lot of this is going to come out at the table when they're talking about how to buy out and how the deal gets negotiated. Our proposal, which makes sense, is that we're going to divide based on population. If you've ever been involved in negotiations, you don't negotiate against yourself. That's our best offer right now. At some point, we'll sit down and figure out what that looks like and what the actual borders will look like, but I do think it's going to be substantially urban versus rural. So I think that's where that's going to end up at. One thing I want to talk about legally, how many here read or were aware of the amicus brief that New California State filed in the Texas case? So that was...
Accepted.
It was accepted. So it was accepted for filing. It effectively got dismissed when they found that Texas didn't have standing, and I could talk about that. I kind of understand where the Supreme Court was coming from that. I think they're trying to let the constitutional process play out. If you had allowed states to sue each other over this, which I think is valid, can you imagine what would happen in the future as every state decided to sue each other, saying because of what they didn't like what they were doing in their state? I think that would have been a very dangerous door to open, as much as I would have liked it. But having said that, it's my understanding that several states are talking about seeing if they can file another round of suits using the same original jurisdiction. I don't know if it'll get any groundwork, but I do believe that does happen, that New California State would file an amicus again. Probably at this point, we might be able to get Nevada to join in again for sure, maybe Illinois. Because I think that sends a message to the rest of the country. There's a lot of discussion I heard that was very positive. There are a lot of people that had not heard of this before. And rather than lumping all of California into one big basket of deplorables, they now realize there's people out here in California that are thinking for themselves and are not happy with the state of affairs. So that got us attention going there. There's a lot of stuff that I could have talked about. I wasn't sure how long Chris was going to go on for tonight, so I was prepared to talk about some other electoral college things and whatnot. But we did say that we would get everyone out of here by 8:30 tonight. So I want to take some questions, if anyone has questions about New California in general.
Well, I had a question about the Supreme Court. So that thing is dead.
The Texas case is dead, but they could refile
They're
it.
dead in terms of that.
Well, that particular filing is dead. They dismissed that filing. They could, one point of clarity, because there was a lot of confusion over it. So when the Supreme Court denied it, there were two justices that dissented. It actually was a 9-0 decision. The entire Supreme Court agreed that it should have been dismissed. Two of the justices felt that in an original jurisdiction case, the Supreme Court did not have discretion of whether to take the case. So two, the judges said, we should have taken it, given them a hearing, but we still would have denied relief. They still would have found no standing. They just agreed over the process.
How do we ensure that we don't over-bureaucrat ourselves again?
We have a tight constitution. We make it hard to amend. California's constitution has been very easy to amend. As Chris said, it's been amended over 640 times. The problem is we need to have a tight constitution that is very lean. It means what it says and makes it hard to amend so that we don't get growing out of control again. Because the problem with a constitutional amendment, when you amend something, it makes it harder to change. So pretty much over the past 10, 20 years, most of the propositions we voted into existence have been constitutional amendments. So once it's part of the Constitution, you can't just pass along and reverse it. So we want to let the legislature do their job, but we don't want to make things so hard to change that we want to keep the Constitution clean, if that makes sense.
How does a possible Biden-Harris administration and the globalistic endeavors of such, how would that affect a new California state?
You mean would New California still have a chance if Biden becomes president?
It's a way to put it. I mean, if that Congress it goes more left, Biden-Harris is, I mean, if Georgia doesn't go our way, I mean, yeah, so therefore socialism is more prevalent. Ocasio-Cortez and all that. How does that have an impact on us?
So a Biden-Harris presidency would make life more difficult, but if we go back to what the Constitution says, the Constitution says you form a state from another state by the consent of the state legislature and the consent of Congress. It doesn't say we need Newsom, it doesn't say we need Biden or Harris. Now, having said that, it certainly would be easier in our current environment to have Trump out of the deal being part of the process of bringing people to the table. Life would be tougher. But New California is not going to stop if that's what happens. It's just going to be a harder road to hoe. Chris, would you agree with that?
Well, I think that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because I don't think anybody can write the check. I think the check's too big.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that, Mark?
So Chris was, just for those on Facebook, that Chris is saying it doesn't matter because no one can write the check. It's going to need a financial solution. It's going to be harder under a different administration, but I don't think it's going to stop it.
Well, I think they're gonna fight like hell not to have two red senators, though. So that's gonna make it a lot harder, because I think the Democrats are gonna fight like crazy.
Oh, of course.
Let me make one comment on that. Yeah, you're liable to get another state. I've said, right now you have Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is, I believe, a $60 billion drain on the federal government, the way it's structured right now. Yeah, so they're dying to make Puerto Rico a state. If it's a state, because it's got a $4 minimum wage there, and you can live pretty good on $4 an hour. But if it was a state, it would have all these other opportunities to really become the call center of the world. And I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a second state. So we'll be in the process, but that's the way it works.
And the analogy would be if you look back to when Hawaii and Alaska came into the Union. I can't recall who was first, but one was held up until the other could come in because Alaska was Republican and Hawaii was Democrat, so that way the Senate stayed equal in power. The House got kind of wacky because of population, so that's why they're talking about bringing someone else in as a state like Puerto Rico that would balance out the Senate so we don't get two more red senators.
Yeah, it was my understanding that Puerto Rico didn't want to get in because they didn't want to pay taxes.
They would find someone. I would think they would either convince Puerto Rico. There's been some talk of D.C. becoming a state. I think there's constitutional issues with D.C. becoming a state. I don't think they can. But I think there's other options they would find. And that's how you sell it to the Senate.
So California has the opportunity for utilities through hydro and our water opportunities. Like a state like Illinois, what's their leverage opportunity to be able to pay back? What are they?
Zero.
People vote with their feet, and Illinois people voted with their feet. They're much farther down the line from the rich people even than we are.
So Chris was saying on Facebook that people vote with their feet. So, yeah, I think we've got a lot more here that we can offer in terms of natural resources. I think, I don't really know what Illinois would be. We also have Nevada that's interested. We've got Oregon's interested. We've got other states. I think each state has an interesting proposal they can bring to the table, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the same thing. The cities are controlling the rural areas. Now, I grew up in New York, so I grew up in the same thing where New York City controlled everything. I lived at the other end of the state that had no voice in government. Same thing we got going here. You got one part of the state with a big population base running all the rural parts and using all the resources for their benefits. So that's what's happening. Illinois got Chicago. All these states have the big city that's sucking the life out of the country. And I'm sure each of their solutions will be unique. So I've got time for one more question, and then we do need to vacate the room. Russ?
I was led to believe that the main reason that Texas had no standing was that the election, they hadn't been heard yet because the election was not completed and they didn't know how damaged they were. Now, after the election is now complete and Texas can say, yes, now look how we have been damaged, does that give them standing, do you think?
It may give them a better standing. In other words, you can't sue, but you can't arrest someone for shoplifting until they completed the steal.
Right.
So the steal has now been completed. So that is the argument, and now we have standing.
Okay.
So the question will be whether the Supreme Court can find a way to grant them standing and differentiate it so it doesn't open the door to states now suing because I don't like the way you're running your water resources in your state. That's harming my interest.
Yep.
If they can figure out a way to define it narrowly, that you have standing because of voting rights only, they might be willing to grant it, not that there's actually been actual harm. But even that, even though the Electoral College voted on the 14th, it's not officially certified till the 6th, so if they really have their harm yet, they may have to really let the steal be completed, and at that point, you're taking a big gamble that the Supreme Court's going to do something. And the challenge is the Supreme Court, as much as we want them to help us, they are unelected officials. What we really need is our state legislatures in Congress who we've elected to stand up and fight for us. And I think that's what Supreme Court's looking for. They don't want to choose the winner. They would like the Constitution to play out. So I think that they could find a way to do standing. I'm not sure the Supreme Court is going to get in the middle of that, as much as I would love them to. So we've got about 5 minutes to be out of here. I know we could talk for another hour because this has been really good tonight. So a couple of things I do want to pass on to you guys. We have rallies every Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock over across from Costco. I know it's a little cold out there, but this is the time to rally. We also have a rally every Saturday up in Auburn. And then every Tuesday, we also have grievance readings. If you're on the Facebook page, you'll see those happening every Tuesday in front of the courthouse up in Auburn. And we have meetings every month here. I don't have the January date on off the top of my head, but we will be posting those on the Facebook page. We have meetings every month for the next several months. And we will continue this, and hopefully in January we'll have a lot more to talk about, and we will celebrate not a new president, but a continuation of the old administration. Thank you very much for coming out.
One more thing. If anybody is here that isn't in Placer County, they want to get on a Facebook page for their county.
Oh, I was going to, one last thing. So if you are not a part of the Placer County Facebook page, please go on there and join. If you're from another county, each county has groups that you can join, but you can join our page and find resources on how to find a group in your county.